There's something about springtime. The flowers start to blossom, the snow melts away, the sun comes out again, and the air just feels revitalizing. The next thing you know, the winter blues start to disappear, and you find yourself getting fresh air again, going for long walks, enjoying nature. And it just feels like a good time to start something new. For me, this comes along with a hunger for reading refreshing classics, classics that are like nourishment for my soul. But not every book fits that mood. Some just feel too heavy. Some feel like work when you're reading them, or they're dark. And there are just a few books this time of year that really get the mood, the time, the season. It all just comes together and they just feel right. So here are five of the books that I feel like are very springtime. They're refreshing, they're meaningful, the kinds of books that might actually get you reading again. And this is in no particular order here. So the first book here, if there is one book that really captures the feeling of spring for me, I think I have to say it's this one. Um, the story begins a little cold. It's kind of closed off, and then gradually, bit by bit, it starts to progress. It starts to see things coming back to life again. And it's not just the garden in this book that comes back to life. It's the people. It's the animals. It's the total environment that comes back to life through the revival of this garden in spring. And this book is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Now, as a great garden enthusiast myself, somebody who loves gardening, who loves springtime for the reason, time to plant, a time to grow, you know, just like Burnett, actually, who was also a big enthusiast for the garden, this book really feels to me like an antidote for melancholy. It's just the perfect book that I would choose as we go into the spring season. It's a genuinely heartwarming story. For me, it's also one of those books that really kind of affected my imagination as a kid when I'm climbing trees in the forest. This was one of those books I think that is just so great to read if you want to remind yourself of that great period of imagination as a child, or if you are younger and you want to inhabit that world of imagination. It's a book, it's super simple. It's super refreshing to return to. You can read it again and again, like great classics. And so The Secret Garden would be my first pick for a great springtime book that just feels like spring. Now, the second one here, and this is the kind of book where the world kind of brightens when you read it. It's the kind of book that makes you feel like everything's going to be okay. Classic as well. Um, you know, I think one of the things that's really cool about this book too is the perspicacity, the perceptiveness of its main character. She just really notices things, details, small moments, which I love from a literary perspective, whether I'm reading or whether I'm attempting to write as well. Just the way that her character in particular, but that she through her character really notices those moments, those places, those details, and really makes them feel meaningful again. And this book is, of course, Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery. Now, as a Canadian, I feel I have to give this one a little bit of extra attention, a little bit of extra appreciation here. I think there's something really unique, really beautiful about how this book captures landscape, imagination, um, the sense of the possible, in a world where a lot of times we are faced with um, cynicism and scarcity. This is one of those books that's just so deeply optimistic, and I think it's one of the most enjoyable introductions to Canadian literature. I really think that, especially for Americans, if you haven't really, traveled to Canada, been to the Maritimes, where this is set as well, it's really going to give you an insight into a different world, a different time period as well. Anne of Green Gables, just super beautiful, optimistic, refreshing book to spend time in. I'd highly recommend it. There's also sequels as well. And you could read the whole series. I actually haven't finished the whole series myself. My sister has. She's a big fan. She loves it. But at the very least, I recommend reading Anne of Green Gables. Beautiful book for springtime. Okay. Now, number three here. I think a beautiful thing about spring is that it isn't always um, it's loud sometimes, the way the blossoms come, the way the world seems to come back to life. But there's also these beautiful, quiet little moments in spring as well. You hear the chirping of the birds, you hear the small sounds of spring coming back to life. And I think it's in those little moments that change is happening. And that's really what is beautiful about spring. It's the beginning of change. It's renewal. It's things coming back again. And that's exactly what this writer captures in his poetry. Now, the work I'm recommending that for poetry reading this spring is the work of the collected works of Robert Frost. Now, I'll say a caveat here. Frost is almost a quintessentially seasonal writer. You could say that one of the first things that comes to mind with Frost is the four seasons. So there are poems that are designed to be read. They don't have to be read at this time, but poems that seem to just fit every season. A lot of autumn poems, right? A lot of springtime poems as well. I feel like especially uh, kind of honing in on some of these spring poems. Nothing Gold Can Stay is probably his most famous one. A Prayer in Spring. There's others as well that are just really fitting for this season. And I love Robert Frost, so I'd highly recommend starting to read Robert Frost. This edition here, beautiful edition. I really love it. It includes four of his poems, beautiful kind of cover art as well. An introduction by Ken Monstein, um, A Boy's Will, north of Boston, Mountain Interval, and then, of course, New Hampshire. So I'm not going to say one of those collections is better for spring than the others because there are certain spring poems in each of them that can work. But my recommendation would be to look at some Robert Frost this spring. Just a really heartwarming writer. Uh, you know, I think it's the kind of reading you don't want to rush with Frost, right? It's something you sit with. You can read a short poem and then just sit with that for a while, and you don't need to go, read everything that he wrote. You don't need to read the whole collection. But I would recommend for spring reading, poetry edition, Robert Frost. Okay, whoops. So that one fell. Um, there's another one here that one of those books that really grounds you in the beauty of ordinary life, ordinary, everyday life. I mean, it's extraordinary, but uh, it really feels meaningful, this book. And this is one of my favorite books. The edition that I have here, Library Classics edition, very beautiful as well. Um, this book follows the March sisters as they grow up. They figure out life, support one another, and it's this really steady story of human development, familial development, but it's just so enjoyable. Just such a great reading for the spring. And of course, that is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This is actually one of my grandmother's favorite books, which is why I have the Library Classics edition. I'm not usually a snob when it comes to book editions. Read whatever book you want. If you have a really nice book that you want to have in your ward in your library, I recommend that if that's something that you love. Personally, I think beautiful books are wonderful, but I also have some of my favorite books that are old tattered copies with dog ears and notes written in them, and so there's beauty to that side of it as well. But coming back to Alcott, she was really influenced by the transcendentalist thinkers. So in the past I've talked about Melville and Moby Dick. If you really liked Walden, which could also be a good spring read actually as well. Anyways, this is a great recommendation I would have for those of you who are more interested in that period of time, in that philosophical tradition. And you can really feel that emphasis on personal growth, on the individual moral development, and simplistic living, simple kind of uh, minimalism almost, like proto-minimalism before minimalism. It's beautifully written, full of memorable characters. Uh, it's just beautiful, and I think it's super refreshing. So that's another one that I highly recommend as we get into the spring season for reading. Now I have some honorable mentions here, but before I get to the last one, I want to mention a few more that really keep that spring feeling. And again, if you guys enjoy this content, please feel free to subscribe. It really helps support the channel here. So the first honorable mention here is Sense and Sensibility. Wonderful book. Highly recommend reading. Feels very spring-like. Jane Austen is a genius, one of the greatest writers of all time, Sense and Sensibility. Second one, Wind in the Willows. I've talked about this one before. Slowing down, coming home, this feeling of settling, just great read for the spring. Wonderful book, highly recommend as well. Third one, Charlotte's Web. This is beautiful. It's one of those stories that sticks with you. So it's maybe a little bit, it could be a little sadder than some of these other stories at moments, but it's just a beautiful spring book. Really, that feeling of revival is strong there. E.B. White, the writer, he's also a great writer for his books on writing, as a little tangent here. He wrote The Elements of Style, or he co-wrote it, and it's really a fantastic work for writers. Stephen King talks a lot about it too in his book on writing, which is also a great work. So highly recommend Charlotte's Web, or honestly anything by E.B. White, Stuart Little, whatever you want for the springtime. Next one, The Princess Bride. This one's just genuinely enjoyable, so fun, adventurous, hilarious, super easy to read. It's really short, so that's a great one as well. How Proust Can Change Your Life. So this is a great one by Alain de Botton, and I think this one's worth reading because it's short, kind of thoughtful look at living life intentionally, uh, a very aesthetic kind of way of living. It's very reflective, but it's accessible. I think it's a great place to start too if you actually are thinking about taking the plunge and reading Proust one day. Probably better than just actually reading Proust. I read this before I started Proust, and full disclosure, I have not finished Proust. Um, you know, in The Search of Lost Time or in The Remembrance of Things Past, I think those are usually how it's the translation. It's À la recherche du temps perdu in French. Um, Great work, but very dense. So I'm working my way through it. And then the last one on the honorable mentions that I really wanted to include, but just didn't want to go super deep with is L'homme qui plantait d'arbres, or the man who planted the trees, or I don't know how it's translated exactly. But I picked this one up because somebody actually recommended it to me in the comments. It turned out to be beautiful, reflective, just a super hopeful story that really felt seasonally appropriate to me. And maybe I'll talk about that in the future. So the man that plants the trees, or L'homme qui plantait des arbres in French. Beautiful book, highly recommend. And now the final one here, and this is one of my favorite books of all time. It is, a book that's just both incredibly well written as well as just super duper enjoyable. So it's got sharp dialogue, it's super intelligent, characters in it are fascinating, they're multi-layered, and everything moves here in a way it just keeps you engaged. You never feel heavy, but it doesn't feel light either. It's not a novel that is just flimsy. It's a novel that is incredibly deep, but meaningful and not negative, I guess, in a way. And this is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. So this edition here, a very battered old scholastic edition, but I love it as well. I remember getting this as a kid and reading this, when I was, in middle school. Beautiful work. My first read of Austen. Austen is considered one of the greatest writers of all time, and honestly, I would probably put her in my top 10 as well. She's just genius. And part of the reason for that is she just really clearly understands and writes beautifully about human nature. So one of the key things that comes to mind when I think of Austen, one of the big words is constancy. Constancy, the idea typically you could think of it like staying true to your values, or your most deeply held beliefs and feelings, even in the face of changing circumstances. And I think that Austen explores characters like this, particularly in Pride and Prejudice, but in all of her works, who grow. They don't lose their moral center, but they still grow, right? And so it's that constant tug of war between their most deeply held beliefs and new information that they're integrating, and they're growing, and they're maybe having to change certain components. She writes really well about the importance of character and virtue and integrity in relationships as well, and you can really see the Aristotelian influence in the work of Austen. This is something Alistair MacIntyre talks a lot about in his work After Virtue. So that's, something that I'm not unique in my understanding of her influence being somewhat Aristotelian, but she's just great at exploring what it means to live meaningfully in an everyday life situation. Not The characters aren't out of this world. They're very in this world, but just morally interesting. And she does this all in a way that's just enjoyable. It's just so fun to read Austen. Pride and Prejudice is great work. It's a perfect one to kind of sit outside and just lose yourself this spring reading Pride and Prejudice, or any other works by Austen, but starting there. So I think spring is one of the easiest times to get back into reading, not because, it's a period where you have to get into reading. It just feels like the right moment, right? I think it's the best time to start without feeling pressure, just for fun, just for enjoyment. And sometimes all it takes is finding a book that just matches the season, matches the feeling. So if you've been meaning to read or you want to read again, maybe this is a great place to start. And let me know in the comments below what books feel like spring to you and what books you guys are hoping to read this spring. Thank you for watching, and God bless.